Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to What Does It Mean to Birth with Justice? We're going to hang out here for a little bit and let our friends join in. Welcome. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Come on in. Please share your name and where you are if you'd like in the chat. We'd love to know who's here. Welcome. This is What Does It Mean to Birth with Justice? We're going to get started in a moment. Letting people join in. Y si alguien necesita interpretación en español, solamente debe buscar el botón abajo, el círculo abajo que tiene 3 puntitos. Y si escoja ahí, español, también puede usar tu usar. Y también busca los 3 puntitos que dicen más. Welcome, everyone. Hi, LA, Detroit. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in a moment. This is our wonderful session, What Does It Mean to Birth with Justice? We're just letting folks join in, making sure anyone who needs interpretation is set up. Si necesitas interpretación en español, solamente debe buscar el círculo, el globito abajo que tiene 3 puntitos, y ahí puedes escoger español. También puedes usarlo con tu cel. También los 3 puntitos que dicen más. Hello, everyone. Every mother's counts. Yeah. Hello, welcome. We're going to hang out here for a couple minutes and welcome our friends. And then we'll get started with what does it mean to birth with justice. Atlanta in the house. Wonderful. All our networks. Welcome. We'll give it a couple more minutes. Si alguien necesita interpretación en español, solamente debe buscar el círculo, el globito abajo que tiene los 3 puntitos y allí puede escoger español como idioma. También puedes usar tu usar y hago clic en la opción de 3 puntitos que dice más. Hello, Texas. Welcome, everyone. Super excited you're here. We're going to wait one more minute and let some folks join. We know lots of folks registered, so we're super excited. New Orleans, oh, wonderful. Thank you. Connecticut, all over the place. Fabulous. Okay, I'm going to announce the interpretation one more time and then we'll get started. Si alguien necesita interpretación en español, solamente debe buscar el globito del círculo abajo que tiene 3 puntitos y allí puede escoger español por su idioma. También puede usar en su visor. Solamente haga clic en la opción de 3 puntitos que dicen más. Okay, thank you so much. Actually, we are actually asking if folks could not do AI assisted. We will be sending out the recording of this. If that would be okay, we have asked the folks not do an AI assisted, but let us know. All right, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you. Here we are. Wonderful. Well, welcome to the final day of Birth Center Week 2024. My name is Julie Quiroz. My pronouns are she and her. I am part of the wonderful, fabulous team of Birth Center Equity and part of the team that is bringing Birth Center Week. Let me introduce Birth Center Equity on behalf of Birth Center Equity. Our mission, our purpose in life is to make sure that everyone has safe and loving birth for generations to come. Also building birth infrastructure for generations to come. And the purpose of Birth Center Week has 2 purposes. One is to really celebrate and elevate the power and potential of birth centers, especially those that are community-based and also to grow the economic, political, and cultural power of birth centers that are located in communities of color. So we're super excited. This is our second annual Birth Center Week. We're going to turn it over now, as we always do. We start with our values and our grounding, and I want to I'll do a formal introduction to Jamarah in a moment, but Jamarah Amani is going to lead us in our grounding today.
Greetings, everyone, and happy Birth Center Week. It's definitely an honor to be here and to be involved in this conversation around what does it mean to birth with justice. So we're just going to start by grounding ourselves, getting into a comfortable position, settling your spirit, settling your body, settling your mind. Whatever you had to do to get to this moment, we are grateful for your sacrifice of time of being here today to be in this conversation with us. So we're just going to start by taking a deep breath. Breathe all the way into your belly and release it. Again, breathe in and let it go. One more time, breathe in. And we're going to release. And as you breathe, release anything that's holding you back today, anything that's no longer serving you, any tension that you feel. And I would ask you to just take a moment to look around you. What do you see? I'm sitting here by my window and I look out and I see palm trees and moringa and various plants growing. What do you hear? I hear the ceiling fan gently whirring in my son's room because he forgot to turn it off before he went to school. What do you taste? I'm tasting my cup of green tea here, so I encourage you to get some tea or some water so we can be good to ourselves and hydrate as we engage in this conversation. What do you smell? Just notice, what do you smell? I smell my Zanzibar jasmine oil that I'm wearing. And what do you feel? I feel my heart beating because I'm excited to be in this space with you all today. And in my heart, I'm holding the values of birth center equity, which are safety, abundance, and liberation, holding those close to my heart. So now that you're in a comfortable position, we've noticed what's around us, we've done a little breathing, we're going to do a sacred grounding meditation. I invite you to close your eyes if you feel led to do that, and just settle in. The trauma of generations has been coded in your DNA, but your ancestors have given you the tools to thrive. Resilience is your destiny. You are still here. You have a right to exist. You have a right to decide if, when, and how to become a mother or parent. Your children, birthed first in your heart, have a right to exist. To safe passage through waterways filled by ancestral tears. Your babies need you to be well. You are never alone. And we're just going to breathe that in. We're going to release our trauma today. We're going to shake it off. We're going to know ourselves. We're going to check in with our body, head to toe. Touch your temples. Tap your temples. Breathe deep. Breathe, tap, breathe, and tap. Gently touch your throat with your hand. Breathe. And if you feel led, you can release a sound. Deep from within you. Today we are releasing, we are getting free, y'all. Remember to breathe. It's okay to cry. It's necessary to cry. That guttural pain is your birth song. Now we're going to begin to tap our collarbone, feel the vibrations. Breathe and tap, breathe and tap. Feel the stress melt away with each tap. And breathe. Now open your hand and place a hand on your heart. We pledge allegiance to ourselves because we are the ones that we've been waiting for. Your heart circulates your blood, your oxygen, your nutrients, the heart that beats, the heart that loves, the heart that honors safety, abundance, and liberation. So we're going to close this with a breath. Breathe in deep into your belly. And release. Ashe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamarah, and thank you for everyone for joining in with that. Wonderful grounding in our bodies and our ancestors, and in the safety, abundance, and liberation we collectively generate. Thank you. I'm going to make an announcement again on the interpretation, just to let folks know si necesitas interpretación en español. Ahora está disponible abajo. Hay un globito en el círculo con 3 puntitos y puedes escoger español. We're going to get started now. It is my incredible joy and pleasure to introduce our 2 panelists today. I'm actually going to read their bios, y'all, because they are just, they've done so much and been so much to all of us that I really want to honor their history. So I'm going to read a little bit here. First, I'd like to reach out to, be with, and introduce Jamarah Amani. Jamarah Amani is a community midwife who believes in the transformative and healing power of birth, and that every baby has a human right to human milk. Her mission is to do her part to build a movement for birth justice locally, nationally, and globally. As a birth worker and advocate, Jamarah has been tracking epidemics of Black maternal and infant morbidity and mortality for over 15 years. She's currently the director of Southern Birth Justice Network, a nonprofit organization working to expand the birth justice movement and to make midwifery and doula care accessible to all. She is also the founder of National Black Midwives Alliance, the only national professional association specifically for midwives of African descent. Jamarah is the recipient of the 2019 Trailblazer Award in the city of Miami, and she's been featured in a variety of media outlets, including CBS, NPR, NBC, Miami Times, and so many other places. Welcome so much. Jamarah, we're so honored you're here. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Keisha Goode, who's going to be interviewing Jamarah as part of this, as the focus of our time together. Dr. Keisha Goode, PhD, is an assistant professor of sociology at the State University of New York College at Old Westbury, but most identifies as a Black midwifery enthusiast. Her primary research area is the medicalization of pregnancy and childbirth in the US, with a focus on Black midwifery. She was appointed as the first public member of the board of directors of the National Association of Certified Professional Midwives in 2015. She is the co-author of Pregnancy and Birth, a reference handbook published with ABC CLIO Press in June of 2021. She is most proud of her book under contract with Columbia University Press, Birthing, Blackness and the Body, Black Midwives in the Pursuit of Reproductive Justice. Thank you both for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Keisha to lead this great conversation.
Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you, Jamarah, for that beautiful, beautiful grounding. Yeah, thank you for reading our bios. I wanted to do just a little bit of my personal intro to Jamarah, and it's so hard to think about a point of entry for this person that I love and respect so much. I'll say I've been thinking a lot about this idea of legacy lately, because I am cycling off of NACPM's board. I have maxed out my terms. I am done, and it has been such an honor of a lifetime. And our executive director asked me to write a piece on legacy a while ago, and I'm working on what that means, but been thinking about that in relationship to this conversation around birth justice and around Black midwifery. And I thought, well, that is my kind of point of entry to Jamarah. So I am not a midwife, as in the bio. I'm a Black midwifery enthusiast for sure. And my point of entry in terms of legacy really starts with Mama Shafia, outside of the wonderful grand midwives that I read about before pursuing an interest in contemporary Black midwifery. But she really was the first person that I talked to when I was doing the dissertation work that's now been about 2010. And we had a phone call on a Friday afternoon, and she said, come out to see me in Portland. And I was on a plane the next week. And we had a beautiful conversation. And when ICTC was in a small basement, and it was such a beautiful office, and showed me bringing in the spirit and all those good things. And she told me to stay in community with Black midwives. That was kind of the condition by which she was going to sort of help me with this project and sort of give me her blessing. And I was really fortunate to meet Jamarah in 2012, which seems so long ago and not, when she was the Florida rep for ICTC. So our sort of shared legacy is this deep love and respect for Mama Shafia, who I think in this country certainly is one of the great leaders of birth justice. And I just want to ground in that, because that is so birth justice, that story, and it is also so Black midwifery, which is the cornerstone of birth justice, which we are going to talk about today. So I'm really excited, and thank you everybody for being here. So in May of this year, Jamarah was here in New York City, and I was so happy to meet her for breakfast, but she wasn't here just to have breakfast with me. She was here because she was honored by the Miss Foundation with the Woman of Vision Award for her impeccable vision, leadership, and midwifing of birth justice in this country. And in her acceptance speech, she said, "My parents intended to conceive and birth a warrior, an activist who would carry on the struggle for Black liberation." I remember you sharing that with me, actually, when we had breakfast that day, and I have never, and I haven't forgotten that. I think that is such a powerful vision. And can you share how your parents' powerful vision informed and oriented your vision for birth justice?
Thank you. Thank you for that personal introduction. I'm really honored to be interviewed by you, Dr. Keisha Goode, my friend, and also someone I admire and respect. And thank you for coining the term Black midwife enthusiast and making it an identity and a profession and something that people can lean into if they're
Yes.
not midwives but need a place to situate their activism. It's such a powerful thing. So yes, I did receive that award, and it was truly humbling to receive the Woman of Vision Award from the Ms. Foundation. And what's interesting is that story about how my parents intended to conceive and birth a warrior only came to me a few months before receiving that award. My mother shared that with me this year when she, on her birthday, and, just a special moment for us. So what's interesting about it is I didn't grow up with the, I guess, conscious knowledge that that was their intention, but it was somehow in my spirit. My father was a Black Panther in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is where I was born. And he was targeted by COINTELPRO, which is a CIA program to essentially, criminalize and eliminate the Black Panthers. And so when I found that out as I was growing up and I learned more about his story, it really did inform my sense of activism, my sense of personal responsibility, and this, idea that we need to organize and activate in order to create change. And I started with an anti-death penalty campaign in California when I was in high school. I organized against police brutality, led walkouts, was part of a group called the Young Comrades, which was Pan-African Socialist group, was part of the new Black Panther Party, all of this before getting into birth work, right? And so I share that because there is this history, this tie of Black midwifery with social movements and with activism. And I think of, I'm going to grab my my statue here that I brought. I think of midwives like Biddy Mason, who is one of my sheroes that I always keep close when I'm doing events like this, because her legacy of going to court, fighting for her freedom, fighting for the freedom of others, and then working as a midwife to care for the most disadvantaged people in Los Angeles and California, where she was, and even across the border in Mexico. I mean, she just has such a powerful history, and was a philanthropist among many things. That's part of my legacy. She was actually the first midwife that I learned about when I received my calling to midwifery. I think about Mama Ayana Ade, who was a member of the Black Panther Party and was also a midwife and was also the founder of Childbirth Providers of African Descent, CPAD, which was a seminal organization in the resurgence of Black midwifery in the 1970s and 80s. So, there's these powerful legacies that, my parents' legacies, my mother's legacy as being part of the Black arts movement, my father's legacy as a Black Panther, and these incredible Black midwives and activists who, really paved this path. And that has truly informed my perspective around birth justice and why we even needed this movement.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, again, kind of continuing our theme of legacy, there's such an intersection with Black midwifery, justice movements, and it sounds like just abolitionism and anti-carceral systems in general. And really, I am so not surprised to hear that you were leading walkouts in high school. That totally that totally tracks there. But I think that that legacy of activism is so incredibly strong and feels so important to continue to center and to name in what Black midwifery is, particularly from a grassroots and community-based perspective. That feels so critical. I am just sort of curious when you were talking about specifically the Panthers and Ayana Day, there's so maybe not even a question here, but kind of a comment that I'm curious just about the intersections there specifically with Black midwifery and the Black Panthers. We know some things, but I feel like we just have so much more that we could learn there.
Yeah, that's one of my archival
Yeah.
aspirations is to find all of the names of the Black midwives who were also involved in, the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement. Um, when I went to Missouri earlier this year, shout out to Okunshola. Um, she hosted a statewide, Black maternal health forum, and I got to go to the archives there. And every place that I go, if I have time, I try to go and find the names that we don't know, because we know there was like a systematic attempt at erasure. And so that, gathering of that information, I really learned how to do that from Dr. Michelle Drew. Shout out to another midwife. And so that's part of my identity now, is just, documenting that history, finding those names, and learning those lessons of the past. And I think it's such important work. I think also the more that we understand about the contributions of these midwives, it helps to inform our movements today. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to repeat mistakes of the past. And I think we need to understand the history, in the spirit of Sankofa, understand the history so that we know how to go forward. So it's definitely a huge part of the work that I've been doing, even through our documentary, Legacy, Power, Voice, Movements in Black Midwifery, which Kay Sanderson has been my partner on that as the director. And we've been producing this documentary for a few years now, collecting stories of Black midwives, documenting elders, ancestors, and the midwives, the Black Power midwives that are doing it now, building birth centers and, transforming their communities. It's a trajectory. And so part of that is reclaiming, picking up the seeds that along the way and gathering that as a powerful collective of tools for our community.
Yes. Yeah. To kind of a continuous ancestral lineage of birth justice in all forms, and really speaking to birth justice is an intersectional movement and deeply intersects with other justice movements too. Again, kind of going back to or continuing, I guess, rather, with the origins of birth justice, can you talk a little bit about your work in Southern California, and specifically how that informed your conceptualization of birth justice versus a rights framework, rather?
Right. So I started working in perinatal health and when I was in California, in Long Beach, and I worked with an organization called Black Infant Health, which is statewide and does some really powerful work around preventing infant mortality and celebrating healthy babies. And I was an outreach worker, so I worked, in people's homes. I taught classes, childbirth education, Afrocentric parenting. We did things like making sure people had vouchers to get to their prenatal appointments, and making sure they had supplies for their babies and they knew about breastfeeding and safe sleep and all of those kinds of things. And that was really an entry point for me into this work that really sparked something that was like, no, this is a path I really want and need to pursue. And then I did move to Atlanta and got involved with the reproductive justice movement about 20 years ago, to date myself, and was at the first, March for Women's Lives, which at that time was one of the largest, I think it might have been the largest march in US history at that time. And, when we were advocating for it to be called the March for Women's Lives, there was a faction that was mostly centered around reproductive rights that wanted it to be called the March for Women's Rights. And so there was like this, internal battle in our movement to say this isn't just about our rights, this is about our lives, and that is a justice issue. That's a reproductive justice issue. And even in that, as a young mother at that time, I was already a mother. I was asking questions like, well, what about birth, and how do I situate myself? How does my birthing experience and my particular reproductive story fit into this movement? And that was really what, asking those questions is really what led me to answer my calling to become a midwife, because I was looking at the statistics of Black women dying. I was looking around saying there's not really a lot of midwives that look like me. So I got to be part of the solution, you know, and I received a strong calling that came in dreams to pursue becoming a midwife. But this justice piece was really still on my mind about how do we build a bridge between reproductive justice and birth work. And in Miami, I found a community of like-minded people. You know, shout out to my colleagues Anjali Sardeshmukh and Angela Hardison, who really from the beginning were asking these questions with me. And we started teaching childbirth classes in Overtown, which is a historically Black community here in Miami, at a women's shelter. And, you know, we started asking those questions to the women that we were in community with, and their answers, we wrote them down, and they became the birth justice framework.
We will definitely get to kind of a little bit more about that history in Overtown. I just wanted, as you were talking, I was really thinking about so much of what's happened with the national attention to the very manufactured Black maternal health crisis. We already know the things that work, like like midwifery. But when you were talking about the calling and sort of centering life, I was thinking about how that is one of Black midwifery's such strong legacies is, yes, of course, in terms of what we know in terms of outcomes around disparities, but there's this powerful centering life and joy and family and community that is so embedded in the work. And that isn't always the part of the conversation. It's like, whew, well, people didn't die, but that's not enough. We want people to live and be joyful and feel grounded, as you did for us today. So it makes so much sense. Again, just want to like continue to emphasize the intersections of Black midwifery and birth justice. They are so, so critical.
Yeah, and you know, having babies isn't about having babies. It's
Right.
how, right? It's how we do it. That's why
Yeah.
these birth center equity values are so important: safety, abundance, and liberation. That's the spirit that, you know, we deserve to birth in. That's the spirit that we deserve to live in. We have a right to our lives, and we have a right to our joy. We have a right to sacredness, right? And really, it's about getting free, ultimately,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
once we have these babies, right, we also want to parent with justice. We also want to parent.
Yeah.
We want to raise free children. So it's more holistic than just one narrow view of it. And I think that, you know, that's part of the dangers of public health, is this like hyper
Mm-hmm.
focus on one thing, without looking at the whole, which is also a problem that we see in the medical system, right? Like we are whole people.
Yes. Yeah.
And so part of the gift of midwifery, and particular Black midwifery, as a
Mm-hmm.
response to, um, you know, that drive and desire for sacredness, Black midwives have really held that up, and been the voice of that, and been the activators of sacredness, even in the midst of the most
Mm-hmm.
immense trauma. We can still
Mm-hmm.
hold on to our sacredness. And I've learned how to do that from Black midwives. And
Mm-hmm.
it's an honor to be able to do that for others as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really want to, yeah, say thank you and very much resonate with this piece around sacredness. And just I have said, I'll get to the next question, but just to emphasize this point too, that I've said as much as I can sort of publicly that I've learned so much about Black midwifery as it relates to birth. But certainly personally, I learned the most as my mother was dying, because there's something about the sacredness of transitions that I think midwifery holds well, but particularly Black midwifery holds that sacredness about the beginning, middle, and end of life there, and how those experiences beginning and end, can be beautiful and abundant and liberatory. And so part of the work, like my vision for Black midwifery, is that over time we start to conceptualize it was what it was historically, is that these are very strong community figures, and birth is an important part, but is not the only part there.
Yeah,
Okay.
agreed. It's a full life cycle, and historically midwives have been the pillars in their
Yeah.
communities, taking care of people,
Mhm.
from preconception to post life,
Mhm.
being part of that full circle. Standing at the gateway of life and eternity, like Dr. Michelle
Mhm.
Drew tells us all the time. So
Mhm.
that's the honor, really, of being a Black midwife, is to be able to stand in that gap for families, no matter what stage they're at.
Right.
And what I see as a full spectrum provider is the same people that come to me for their prenatal care will also come to me for their miscarriages, will also come to me seeking abortions, will also come to me with a runny nose and, an ailing family member. And even if I don't have all the answers, I can be with them. And
Yeah.
that's sometimes the gift, is that we can be in community
Yeah.
with people.
Yeah.
And really, you don't have midwifery without community. It's at the
Mhm.
essence of what it means to be a
Mhm.
midwife. It's at the essence of what it means to birth with justice, is to be
Mhm.
in community and to be held
Mhm.
in that, and that we experience our sacredness in that community, in that
Mhm.
collective.
Yeah, which really just speaks to the such limits, and that is saying it generously, the patriarchy and the white supremacy of limits of focusing on a rights framework doesn't even fully capture the depth of humanity and what it really means to witness another human being. There is such a skill there that I think, and an honor that midwives have. I've certainly experienced that with you as my friend.
Mhm.
Um, I've learned so many things from you, one of which is about, I think, kind of speaking of abundance, but I'm saying this more about the complexities of birth justice. There's the kind of values of it and sort of the principles. There's the way of doing, or I would say the praxis, and there's the movement. Can you say a little bit about the values, or share with us the values of birth justice?
Well, Keisha, I've got a slide for you.
Oh, yeah.
Let me see if I can
My lucky day, our lucky day, everybody.
make it do what it do. Is it doing what it do?
It's a little small.
Let's see. I can get it off of thumbnails, maybe. And I'm gonna try again,
Okay.
because we practiced this
We
and
did.
it was perfect.
Okay, we're good.
But tech is tech. Let's try it again. How's that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so these are what we consider the core values of birth justice, which are autonomy, which is really, we never have to surrender our bodies to this system. We are always in control, no matter what setting we're walking into. Um, and we don't always experience that, right? But it's a value that we hold. Also participation, which is centered around community, which we just spoke about, collaboration, in that same vein, creativity. I spoke about the Black arts movement, but there is this like creative aspect of just being in our body's cultural expression, and the right to cultural safety, right? Of course, there's justice, which involves fighting for our rights, but it involves so much more. It's not just the laws and policies, it's also about access. It's also about reparations and repair. It's also about being able to speak our truth and to speak truth to power, and to be heard, right? Decolonization is a huge value, because we know that birth work, that our births, that our bodies, that our communities have been so colonized. through settler colonialism, through slavery, through Jim Crow, through redlining, so many aspects that have colonized our ability to really live full lives. And so we are in the process of decolonizing in this work. We have tradition, which really focuses, in birth justice, we really focus on those cultural rituals, traditions that tap us into sacredness, that allow us to experience the fullness of our way of life and of our ancestral way of life, that those ancient technologies which really inform wellness, right? Part of how we experience wellness is through our traditions. Healing is another aspect of that. We know that epigenetics is real, post-traumatic slave syndrome is real, and that we are healing from those things, that we are activating around a future that is more whole. And healing is part of that process. It's a key part of that process. And then there's community, which we spoke about, how we experience our sacredness is really in community, and that it takes intention to actively build community. It actually takes forgiveness and communication. And, we value restorative justice because we want to transform our relationships in ways that decolonize what it means to relate to each other, and in ways that allow us to envision, a more holistic future together. And then, of course, celebration, which is really in birth justice centered around bringing marginalized people to the center, right? Young parents, Black and brown folks, immigrant folks, LGBTQI plus folks, bringing us to the center and celebrating who we are. Our identities are something to be uplifted and honored, and not always, pathologized and just made a statistic. We can be in our identities, and we can be in our identities together and be, in celebration of that.
Yes, thank you. And these values, in terms of what I have learned from you, and you referenced this a little bit earlier as we were talking just about the community-based kind of grassroots origin, but you were talking about with Black moms in Overtown, how you kind of worked with them to really build the values of these values that we see here of birth justice. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about just the process of that for us, because now we understand it as values, praxis, movement, but how did this kind of come to be?
Yeah, so there's these different elements of the work, right? And I think it's really important to highlight intersectionality as well. And there are frameworks that we tap into that existed before we started calling this birth justice, right?
Right.
Frameworks like intersectionality. We talked about the Black Panthers and the health justice work that they did. There's so many things that we've collected and learned along the way, from Black feminism, from just frameworks that inform what it means to be a liberated person, to be in a community that is advocating for your liberation. And there are the different elements of that really relate to having a multi-issue movement, relates to doing the work, right? So direct service, but also advocating for folks and looking at policies. And then also, teaching and training and building a workforce that is equipped to hold this body of work. And so we started doing this work in 2009, 2010. And we started by working with, here in Miami, working with young parents, teaching childbirth education, and really creating a space, a safe space for folks to actualize their vision of what it means to birth with justice, parent with justice, right? And build communities that are centered around justice. So there's these different aspects of the work: advocacy, education, and access, that we really hold as central to what it means to be a birth justice organization.
Yeah, and I want to highlight something that you said, and maybe we can just expand on a little bit. Three particular intersections here that feel really important to the origins. One, being in the South, significance of that, especially as it relates to Black midwifery. We could say the attempted eradication of Black midwifery didn't actually happen, but how that happened in the South is one. Young people, too, like I think really actively highlighting and centering young people feels really important and intentional. Curious about that. And about queer and trans folks. Like when we're talking about birth justice, those three areas feel really critical to the origins.
Absolutely. I mean, we have to look at the Southern roots, right? We know what happened to Black midwives in the South. We know the history by now that, when I look at the state of Florida, when there were 4,000 midwives, direct entry midwives, in the state that were registered with the state. And now today we have about 19 Black direct entry midwives in the state of Florida. It was, like you said, an attempted eradication. We're still here, but we're smaller in numbers. But that history really does matter because we have to understand that there was white supremacist patriarchal agenda, which was really tied up with the eradication of abortion as well, which began with the American Medical Association in 1857 and led up to the Shepherd-Towner Act of 1921. And that during that time, there were these campaigns to paint Black midwives as, dirty and uneducated and all these negative things, in order to facilitate birth, moving into hospitals, in order to facilitate the end of abortion access, in order to facilitate control over women's bodies. And so that's a really important piece of the story because we can't just say we need birth centers and we need midwives, right? We have to ground ourselves in what that history looked like in order to develop a strategy for how do we counter these narratives that are so grounded in these systems of oppression. And then about working with young people, that was just how the work started, really, because, for me, I was a young mother myself, pregnant at the age of 19, and I really related to some of the narratives of shame around what it meant to be a young parent. And so part of our mission, early on was to provide safe spaces for young people to be able to have a rite of passage into motherhood, to be able to have options and choices around their, reproductive health, and to be able to have systems of support that looked like the values that we just shared around, community and autonomy, and justice and healing and traditions. And we saw that there were so many young people that were disconnected from that didn't even have a concept of something like baby wearing, right? Which is another aspect that has been colonized and co-opted. That's really a part of our, when we look at like Black and Indigenous cultures, baby wearing is a key part of how we cared for our children. But because it's been co-opted and colonized and consumerized, where now baby carriers are so expensive, and the community knowledge, because really this knowledge of how to wear a baby, how to give birth, how to breastfeed, all of these things, it doesn't belong to the healthcare providers. It doesn't belong to the public health people. It belongs to the community. And so part of working with young people was how do we restore this to the community? And then also, we really wanted to have a doula program that was based in peer-to-peer. So if we're providing doulas for young people, those doulas should be young people. Yeah, so that was how we started. And your third thing was, LGBTQI. That's always been important to us. I identify as a queer person, and we're a queer-led organization. And part of that has been making sure that we're not further marginalizing trans people and queer people. And sometimes what we see in midwifery, unfortunately, is this perspective that only women can give birth, that only women can be pregnant, that non-binary and trans people are either invisible or sorely disrespected. and violently so. And so, again, our mission is about centering marginalized people, and we have to be honest about who those marginalized people are. Yes, oftentimes they're women, but oftentimes they are queer and trans people as well. And early on, we started having conversations with our queer and trans community, because when we developed the framework, we also workshopped it in different spaces. We workshopped it at conferences, at ICTC conferences, at Sister Song conferences, at community spaces here in Miami and all across the country. Over a dozen times, we held workshops for feedback and, revised the framework. And one of the things that we kept hearing is that we need to include a gender inclusive language. And so that was important from the beginning, that we didn't erase the word mother, but that we included the word parent, that we didn't erase the word woman, but that we included the language of birthing people, because we're trying to build a tent of liberation that's big enough for all of us. And we don't have to leave anyone out. It doesn't have to be this versus that. There's room for all of our identities. I'm a woman, I am Black, I am queer, I have a transgender son. This is all me. So, from my perspective, it was important to include everyone from the beginning. All my people get free.
Yeah, whew, that is so powerful as we keep working actively towards liberatory futures. It's like, as I was listening to you, I was jotting some things down, just like the respectability politics of it all is never ever going to get us free. That is not our path to freedom and liberation. More internalized struggle at that. And there's that piece of continuing to name, and I think it's just so important that it was so embedded just organically in the origins of birth justice. But as you point out, there continues to be a continued conversation around patriarchy, and specifically cishet patriarchy, how that is manifesting itself in midwifery, and specifically Black midwifery. And again, that is getting us further away from these liberatory futures that we all deserve and actively strive for. So when we're talking about birth justice, it's just important for me to say out loud, and for everybody on this call, that there's the intersections of Black midwifery, the South, young people, and queer and trans people in particular, which gets me to my next question. One of my favorite things, so many things I love, but one of my favorite things about the National Black Midwives Alliance is this principle of we are who we serve. And actually, I'll stop there. What does that mean to you?
It means that when we are thinking about our frameworks, designing our programs, base building, building community with folks, that we're the people that we're serving. So when we first, our ripple of community is, are we okay? Am I okay? Are we okay? And then from there, it radiates out to our community. So the sense of self-care, community care, and this idea that, we all get free together. We can't leave anybody behind, So we are who we serve, because we're building a movement that is about us getting free. It's about all of our people getting free. So we have to be we are the ones we've been waiting for, and we have to be the ones who we're serving as well. And I think that's important because of this issue of co-optation. There's a lot of money flooding into maternal health right now.
Yeah.
And we saw a lot of money flood into infant health and infant mortality prevention in the 90s. The rates are the same.
Yeah.
So, to just have a purely public health lens around this work, or to just say we're going to build more buildings where people can give birth, isn't enough. The values have to be there. The justice has to be there. And we can't just look forward. We have to look back and figure out how we're going to repair harms that have been done, because these are generational harms. And how do we continue moving forward without repair? We're just going to be bringing broken people along. So that goes back to we are who we serve. If we're about healing, if we're about justice, if we're about, you know, becoming whole, then that has to start with us.
Yeah, I'm hearing, especially I want to emphasize something you just said about kind of the co-optation of birth justice, because we have talked a good bit about there are growing organizations that talk about being a birth justice organization. There are academic works. It is just kind of growing over time without, as you're saying, really grounding in the history and the values. And I'm hearing that to operationalize birth justice is to center this idea of we are who we serve. And as we have to be responsible for building systems that, you know, sort of care for the carers. If midwives and all other birth workers are sort of the carers, how do we as enthusiasts and otherwise sort of build collective systems collaboratively that really do some caretaking there for, yeah, I'm seeing Julie's comments there, for those that are sort of doing this direct work. I'm curious if you have, I believe we've touched on it, but any other thoughts about how to operationalize birth justice for individual people, organizations, or otherwise?
Well, one of the things we teach in the birth justice workshops, which I'm going to try to share my slides again. I think I did it. So one of the things we teach in the birth justice workshop, of course, is history around Black midwives. But this piece I think is really key. This idea that health disparities didn't just rain down, you know, from the sky, right? It's not because we're Black, it's because the system is racist. And that health disparities are rooted in power disparities. So if we're not addressing the relationship of power to systemic power, to institutional power, structural racism, right? Obstetric violence, medical racism, like all these forms of oppression that people experience on a day-to-day, and I would say minute-to-minute basis, not only in this country, but globally as well. If we're not talking about that, if we're not strategizing around that, if we're not advocating for the fundamental power relationships that exist in our society that are based on white supremacy, patriarchy, homophobia, transphobia, right? If we're not addressing those, then we are not going to impact these health disparities in a real and meaningful way. And we're going to be having these same conversations in 30 years and 50 years after all of these millions of dollars flood into maternal health. That's not the only solution. We have to be able to transform our actual systems in order to, you know, actualize this change. And that to me is at the heart of birth justice. And if people are not doing that work, right? If we're just saying we're going to train midwives and we're going to train doulas, right? But we're not using liberatory frameworks. We're not talking about power disparities. We're not demanding that these systems stop killing us, because preventable deaths are murder. Let's be really clear about that. We know that 80 to 90% of maternal deaths are preventable. And because those changes have not taken place to prevent them, we consider that a human rights violation. I personally have gone to the United Nations with other advocates to let the UN know that the US is violating our basic human right to life and to health. And that is all about addressing these power disparities. And that goes, it's bigger than midwives, it's bigger than doulas. It is actually really about systemic change, and it's about liberation.
Really powerful what you just said here. I'm like really resonating and just sort of taking that in. I mean, I know these things, but it's powerful to hear the way that you're saying it. And I sort of learned over time from midwives like you in particular to even just our language of it when we talk about like like outcomes as if it's something passive. It's there are to use systems accountable language is that systems permit Black people to die and so on. And so I think the how systems are going to cede power, leverage power, that is the focus of our conversations. And what I'm also hearing is that is what it means to really do and operationalize birth justice, which I think actually brings us a little full circle to what you were talking about with your parents' vision, actually, about this anti-carceral abolitionist systems. That is the essence of what we are talking about here to get us to the abundance and liberation that we all deserve. Thank you for that. That was powerful. So we are, and thank you to BCE for this. This is really lovely. And I just want to say thank you so much to everyone that made this happen. And I want to speak specifically about, or ask you about birth justice centers, but you've always been, speaking of language, important to say, you made it important to say liberatory birth justice centers. Can you say a little bit more about what liberatory birth justice centers are, or birth centers are?
But you said it right, birth justice centers, because we do need birth centers, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier Mama Shafia Monroe, but big shout out to her because she was the one that started me saying a midwife on every block and a birth center in every neighborhood.
Yes.
That's the goal, right? But it also, we have to remember that these centers need to be birth justice centers, not just birth centers. That justice aspect is so important for all the reasons that we've been talking about, because I'm sure we all know midwives who are not centered in justice, who have the ability to oppress and traumatize people. We know that midwifery itself has been co-opted, by white women. It was taken away from Black women and co-opted by white women. And so now the majority of the birth centers, of the over 400 birth centers, I think less than 20 are Black owned or led.
Yeah.
So, we can't just say birth centers. We have to say birth justice centers. We have to demand birth justice centers, and that what has been stolen from our communities, we have to reclaim it and to have that returned in a way that is liberatory, that people walk in and feel welcomed. They feel the wholeness and the healing coming off of the walls and coming off of the people. They feel seen, they feel heard, they feel held. They feel that sense of groundedness, and the respect for their autonomy is honored there. Their cultural safety is protected. That they are able to speak their vision for their bodies, their families, their lives, and to have that be honored in a way that, is part of this community of sacredness. So that's what, to me, liberatory centers look like, and that we have all of the resources that we need to build them, and to build them right in our communities, where we live, where we work, where we play. And that, it's not just about having the baby. It's then about, now you're part of this family. Now you're part of this community. We parent in community. We parent with justice. We demand that systems keep their hands off of our babies. One of the things that we advocate for in birth justice is the end to medical kidnapping, the end to the collusion of the state with medical providers in a way that robs primarily Black families of their children. All of these systems are in collusion in ways that are oppressive. And so we have to be in collusion with each other in ways that are liberatory. And that's the only way we're going to build birth justice centers, is we have to be intersectional, and we have to be collaborative in the way that we're thinking about the future, so that we're not just building buildings, but we're building people. We're building families. We're building communities that are whole. And it
Mm-hmm.
cannot be about pathologizing people and just telling them how to eat, drink, and exercise. We have to look at what is the environmental justice
Mm-hmm.
aspects of this. We have to look at things like redlining and what type of access to land do people have. You can't have birth centers without land, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the liberation of the land is important to this conversation.
Yeah.
You know, abolitionist thinking and abolitionist strategy and abolitionist policies are important to this. There's so
Mm.
many levels to it, and we have to be intersectional in how we're thinking about our liberation so that we can all get free. It always goes back to that for me.
Yeah, that's
We
so
gotta-
powerful. Yeah, like communal wellness, and just to, yeah, thank you for that. And just to add on, thinking, I saw the Black Midwives Alliance post today about I believe it is less than 20 Black owned and or led birth centers, and thinking about who those midwives are that we know and respect and love, and how do we build systems that, again, like, care for them too, in terms of their own health and safety and sustainability, from Kiki Jordan to Nakia Grayson. How do we build systems for those people who I think are, in collaboration with so many, doing these I have liberatory birth justice centers? How do we build systems that make it so that they aren't doing this forever unless they want to? How do we build those systems that are nurturing and loving for them too? Yeah. So
It
so so
starts with the students too. You know, that's been a big
yeah.
thing for us at National Black Midwives Alliance, is supporting students and
Yeah.
helping them to figure out, ways to be sustainable, to care for
Mhm.
themselves, to care for their families. And big shout out to midwives like Nakia and Kiki who, are doing the work of looking at what does it mean to be sustainable in building
Mhm.
a workforce, in building a birth center, and making sure these services are accessible to people but not at the detriment of the providers. Um,
Yes.
I think the average career of a midwife is like 7 years or something like that. Many of
Mhm.
us have to leave the profession because we have to care for families, right? Or
Yeah.
we get pregnant or someone gets sick or, some life instance happens and many of us don't have insurance or, money,
Mhm.
generational wealth to continue working in the profession. And it is a profession that requires a lot of sacrifice. So at NBMA, we've been really focused around our mission of how do we help Black midwives thrive? It
Mhm.
starts with the students, it continues as we are working in the profession. And then we have to think about our elders, we have to think about retirement, we have to
Yes.
think about why people shouldn't have to do this work until they're 70 and 80 years old when they've worked hard their whole lives, sacrificing, caring for families, being on call, you know, um,
Yeah.
and meeting the needs of their communities. They should have their needs met when they're ready to sit
That's right.
down and
Right.
and sit in a rocking chair and watch their grandchildren play. So
Yeah.
all of that are things that we think about at National Black Midwives Alliance. How do we build these systems of support and care that really have historically existed in our communities, right? And because of the violence of this system, we've kind of gotten away from that. And so part of that reclaiming is also, again, we are who we serve. So how do we put ourselves back to wholeness so then we can then extend that out to our community?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Shout out to all the students on the call here today. Okay, and again, thank you to Birth Center Equity, because I think you all are really leaders in what we are talking about here today, and especially shout out to Leslie Welsh. Um,
Mm.
Last but not least, you have an announcement for us.
Oh, I do. So speaking of Leslie, and
Yes.
also, the big announcement we're really excited to share is that we've been working on a project called the Birth Justice Origins Project, where some of what we've talked about today about the herstory of birth justice, the foundational aspects of this movement, the frameworks that we draw from, the values. We have some incredible timelines. And also thinking about birth justice futures. What are the considerations as we continue to build this movement? What are the things that we want to be focused on? And being clear that this is, a Black-led movement, that we refuse to allow our movement to be co-opted by oppressive systems, and that we want to pass this on in a way that the next generation coming through has a clear grounding in what birth justice is. And so we're going to be releasing the Birth Justice Origins Project before the end of the year. I don't have a solid date yet, but we are working diligently on it. There will be a website and a paper that you can download, and some incredible archival aspects as well. So I believe there is a QR code if you want to be on the waiting list, to be able to be notified when the Birth Justice Origin Project is available. You can use the QR code or the link that's in the chat and just add your contact information, and we'll make sure that you're among the first to know. And that is my church announcement.
Thank you. Thank you so much for just your heart and your tenacity and your vision. Also, thank your parents. It's a beautiful full circle story there. I just love you so much. I have all of the continued respect and admiration, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to build liberatory futures with you.
Thank you. And thank you for working with me on the Birth Justice Origins Project. It's an honor to have your expertise, your knowledge, your scholarly rigor involved in it. And also big shout out to Leslie Welch, who is our third partner on the project, who has come with so much incredible passion and visionary insight into where we're going with this. So stay tuned for more.
Stay tuned, everybody. Thank you, Julie. Oh, you're muted.
Julie.
Sorry, there we go. Because all I wanted to do was just keep on listening and listening. Thank you so much for the invitation back to history, back to community, back to justice, where we belong, where we started, where we must just day after day, minute after minute, breath after breath, come back. So thank you so much. We're going to go to some questions, but we're noticing in the chat that folks are very eager to get into the link, but it is not giving them access. So before we go, I just wanted to make sure if there was a way to change the settings.
I think
Cassandra is on. Cassandra created that. If you could work on that, and then just put in drop the link in the chat again when it's open for people to click on it and put their information in. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone. We're all in it together on tech and forms, and we make it all work, right? So thank you. Yeah, just let us know if that link's open. If it's for some reason we can't get it to work today, we will make sure that it goes out in the communication you get after this session. And other folks are asking, there will also be a recording of the session that you all get. It will also be announced on social media. It will be on YouTube. It will be on the Birth Center Week website. So we will make sure that you have that. And there are so many people beyond today's group that will want to hear this. I know it's really important and transformational work. So we will make sure it will be out. We have a few minutes left and wanted to see if folks had any questions or comments that you wanted to share. You could go ahead and drop them in the comments and we could read them if you like. Any questions for Jamarah or Keisha?
Just noticing some gratitude, particularly to Jamarah in the comments throughout. I was noticing.
And gratitude back to you all who are in the grassroots on the ground doing the work. We're in this together.
I had a question if I could bring it forward. We're so excited about the Birth Justice Origins Project. And just wondering if you could say a little bit more about like what your vision is, or what do you imagine the next couple of years of unfolding of that project might look like?
Thank you. That's a great question. I'd love to hear the answer from Dr. Good as well, who's working on the project with me. So, we wanted to do this project. It's actually been a aspiration of mine for some years now, to really be able to situate and ground folks in the origins of birth justice, because we are starting to see more of the name being used, by lots of folks in maternal health work and perinatal health work, and people like to latch on to a term or a phrase when it's sexy. And so I want to make sure that we're honoring the integrity of birth justice, that we are grounding ourselves in the values, and that people who are using the term birth justice, including funders, let's be real, are being held to a standard that if you're saying you're about birth justice, then this is what it means, and we can go to them with a clear articulation of what that is. And a lot of people, when we started building the birth justice movement and developed the framework, people said, oh, you should trademark that, copyright it. And I was very intentional in the beginning in saying I didn't want to do that, because I wanted this to be like the seeds that we're throwing out and spreading. I didn't want to have a limitation on people that could use it to be able to voice this idea of shifting power disparities and what does it mean to birth with justice, and envisioning liberatory futures for our families. I wanted that conversation to spread as far and wide as possible, and it really has, even globally, right? We're doing birth justice work in East Africa, and like I said, we took this to the United Nations, right? So that aspect of it has been, really important over the last 15 years or so, to allow birth justice to really spread. And the and to that is that the integrity does matter. The values do matter. The frameworks matter, the key issues, right? Being able to have people get a deep dive into what that means. And so we have lots of different tools available already. And this Origins project is going to be a way to kind of situate some of those things, like our Birth Justice Bill of Rights, our Legacy Power Voice documentary, the Black Midwives Model of Care. We have a Black Midwife Herstory timeline that gives you so much information, that was lovingly put together by Kim Banton, Program Director of NBMA, who I believe is on this call. Big shout out to her. There's so many beautiful tools that we've developed over the years that we've shared in different ways, but this will be kind of a centralized way, almost like a encyclopedia of birth justice for people to be able to go and just really take those deep dives and to learn, so that when we're using birth justice, we're clear about what we're talking about, and we're able to collectively envision a future that's grounded in the realities of what birth justice is. So Keisha, I'd love your perspective on that as well.
Ditto. And and I think it centers back to, you're talking about looking in the archives for Black midwives at various points. And I sort of see this as part of that archival process too, so that for generations to come, this can exist, so that as we continue to work towards birth justice and liberatory futures, that there's this place of groundedness, that this exists as a full archive with all of the photos from working with the young moms, and there's the documented origins and the robust timeline, as you're saying, that all of that exists in an archival space. And that I kind of consider it as just part of the work of Black reclamation and our history, like trying to really archive what we know and continue to update it over time. I see it as the beginning of an ongoing project that I'm happy to support. And I just want to emphasize that the work is there, is already done, just that we are kind of archiving it to be really treasured and I think honored, it's not recreating a thing, it's honoring and archiving a thing.
Absolutely. And one more thing I'll say about that is that because we always want to be grounded in reproductive justice too, that we saw the co-optation of reproductive justice and Black women having to fight to say, no, actually, we created this. And if you're not talking about Black liberation, you're not talking about reproductive justice. And so I think as a student of the reproductive justice movement, which, I became a part of in my early 20s, I watched that unfold. I learned those lessons. And so that's, again, Sankofa moment, just looking back to say, oh, we don't have to be erased. We don't have to have our voices silenced. We can actually, claim our power, because this is about shifting those power disparities, and reclaim our history and our herstory, and use our voices to tell our truths. And just like we encourage our birthing clients, our pregnant folks, to do, we got to do that for ourselves as well. So that was a huge part of it too, was thinking about what happened with reproductive justice and wanting to, make sure that there's a place, like Keisha said, a place where this lives for in 10 or 20 years, if people forget that it's Black women that founded this movement. Nope, there's a place where that lives.
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Julie.
Thank you. And thank you so much to Gianna for resharing the QR code, and Cassandra for resharing the link. So it should be available to everyone. So if you want to click there, it's there. And if not, we will make sure to get it out to everyone. Any last questions from the chat? I know this has been just a really, nourishing and revelatory reminder of what we need to ground in. And I want to thank everyone for being here in this session. Everyone who joined us, everyone who's going to join us, who's going to be watching this in the future, and everyone who's been here for the whole week of Birth Center Week. We've reached over 200,000 people online this week, and hope to reach even more in the recordings. So thank you, everyone. And again, just this session so deeply echoes again one of the core hopes, dreams, and commitments of Birth Center Week, which is growing the cultural, economic, and political power of our movement and our birth justice movement. So thank you for elevating that so beautifully, so generously, and so carefully. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. I think we'll close with gratitudes. If people want to share in the chat any gratitudes for Jamarah, for Keisha, also for Gianna for holding our Zoom down, for Maria, who's been with us all week long, doing an amazing job in interpretation. Thank you
So I was
all
going to
so
say,
much.
shout out to the tech team,
Yes.
to the patient team,
Sid.
to Julie, to the whole Birth Center Equity team for putting this week together. And congrats on the congressional recognition. Huge. Yeah, and I'll just say shout out to looking forward to Black Midwives Day, where we continue as we prepare for Black Midwives Day. All of this is tied in together, and we are part of one movement. And so the more that we can unify, get out of our silos, and make the commitment to justice and to liberation, that's how we build.
How we get free.
We get all our people free, as you said. We get all our people free. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Everybody take care.
Thank you. Blessings.
Blessings. Thanks, Maria.